Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Aiken, and I am here today with I'm calling him my co-host, even though I don't think he officially wanted to grab that role forever, Galen Clavio.
I mean, no one asked. Are we naming that right now? If so, hey, I'm all about it. That's awesome.
We are, I guess, Happy New Year. Wow. We're gearing up for the spring 2025 semester to start. And I'm sure some of you are maybe already looking at your syllabi. I know we were talking really quickly before we hopped on, and Galen has classes starting next week, even though you're not teaching this semester, but classes at IU are starting next week. KU, we don't start until after MLK Day, but I think usually, next week is if you're starting classes, you already have maybe thought about your syllabus, although maybe not, because if you're like us in the Midwest, maybe you got a huge snowstorm that took away a few of your days.
This is the one time, like the Midwest thing's always interesting because you live in Kansas or Missouri or somewhere in that general vicinity, and I live in Indiana. These are not the same culturally, but they're both considered part of the Midwest. But this was one of those unifying storms where we all kind of got the same snowy weather.
We sure did. And if you had some time set aside for syllabi creation this week, it may have gotten gobbled up by helping your children learn math.
Yeah, that fell more on Katie than it did on me. So I already had meetings planned this week. Unfortunately, that was my excuse.
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting one. And I will say that the topic for today that we're going to talk a little bit about is kind of what to do with that first day and in some instances, first week of classes. I always remember it as a student, we would call it syllabus day, right? Because we knew we were going to walk into classrooms, we were going to get handed a paper copy of syllabus, we were going to walk through it, and then 20 minutes in, we were gone. And that was kind of everybody's first day experience. And I don't know why this was the case, maybe because of my advisor, but early on, I had started to think about syllabus day as sometimes students, I think we think of it as maybe a not important day when we're students, but from a professor standpoint, for me, it's actually the most important day because it is my opportunity to set expectations, to answer questions, to make sure that the students know what they're getting into. And I'm trying to clearly describe what it is that we're trying to do. And because of that, for me, I've been thinking pretty intentionally about it for the last few years. But the reason this came up as a topic is a colleague of mine sent me a text message saying, I don't know what to do. I got this email from a student, and she's a new teacher. And she got an email from a student that said, I could try to make things work to be there the first week, but I'm not sure I can be there the first week. Am I going to miss anything important? And I was like, well, we talked a little bit about how to handle that email or some suggestions that I had, but I thought that part of that is a perception problem I think that students have because a lot of faculty do fall into the 10 minutes on the syllabus, see ya on Thursday or see ya next week, and don't really take advantage of that first opportunity to describe the class, set a tone, and even maybe get some interaction going. And for students, they might skip it because for them, they're like, why would I show up to read something for 10 minutes that I can get on my course website and read whenever I want? It's not important to me, right? Like that isn't necessarily their perspective. I don't know if you've had a similar experience, Galen, in your years of teaching.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think as I've gone through the whatever 16 or 17 years I've been teaching at this level, I've kind of gone back and forth on syllabus day as far as like what it should be used for. One of the things I keep coming back to is that we have a finite number of class sessions in a semester, and this one counts. It counts just as much as the last one, and I do try to keep that in mind. But I also think that there's a lot of movement with students. They don't always stay in the class that they're in to start with. You get students that add after the fact in some cases, and you don't want to do too much unique work the first day because whether or not we want to say that we like it or not, college has always, at least as long I think in recent memory that we've got, it's always been a situation where you go to a class, you may need it, it may be a required class, and I think that's something we should bring up. It's like the difference between required courses and survey courses, but a lot of it's like it's the appetizer platter that first couple of days to see whether it's actually something that you want to be in or not. And so I have a lot of conflicting thoughts on this that I'm hoping that we can talk through and work out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. First, the difference between a survey class and a required class for one really important reason is the mindset that students will come into that class with is going to be different. If it's required, it doesn't matter if I tell them we're going to take a test every week. They have to take the class to get the degree. But if it's a survey course and there is assignments or topics or the content itself is not what they thought it was going to be, and let's all be honest, the course description that somebody might have created 10 years ago for the class that you're teaching today, and this is certainly true in any discipline that moves relatively quickly, is not always the most accurate representation of what you're planning to teach or have students do.
Right.
And so they might have read that when they registered for the class. They might get in the door and be like, nah, not for me. I don't want to present 5 times this semester. So there is a big difference between how students are approaching the class and whether they have to be in there or not be in there. I'm curious, Galen, since you said you had some thoughts on this, because I obviously do too. What perspective have you been approaching that first day with, maybe for a required class?
Yeah. Well, I believe in the information age and in the digital age that we don't need to treat it like we treated it in 1997, when the first chance you would get to look at the syllabus or the first chance you'd get to understand what the class is about was the day that you walked into the classroom. So, what I've really tried to do is get my syllabus published a week before the class starts. We use Canvas here at IU, and whether you're using that or Blackboard or some other proprietary content management system, I get that out. I make an announcement to students, and I tell them, "Hey, here's the syllabus. The assignments are plugged in. You're going to get a pretty good sense of what this class looks like. Please go look at those things. And if you have questions right now, email me. If you have questions that you want to ask in person, ask me then." But that allows me to maybe take a little bit of the uncertainty that people might have about what the class is actually about, especially as you say, since many of the course descriptions were plugged in a long time ago and have never been updated because faculty don't think to update them. They may update their syllabus, but they may not update what's in the catalog. And even at a big university like Indiana, a lot of times people don't realize what students are looking at because you're not looking at that material if you're a faculty member or administrator. So I try not to take any of that for granted. During syllabus week itself, or syllabus day, it's not really a week, but it depends on the class. Like if I'm doing a twice a week class, I will generally just carve the first day out. I will go in depth through the syllabus. I will go through every section, including all the academic misconduct stuff, including all of the, here's what the class was about, here's the learning objectives, here's how we're going to evaluate these things. And that normally takes about 35 to 40 minutes to really go through each one, describe the assignments. I normally record this as well so that if I have students that join the class later, they can watch that. I don't have to repeat everything. And normally they'll be like, "Hey, I just signed up for the class. What do I need to do?" I'll be like, "Watch this video that's got all the information in it." That way everybody's on the same page. And I think that that's important because as much as we talk about the syllabus being a contract between the student and the instructor, people don't read contracts. When was the last time you read the EULA on a software, item that you installed? Or, we don't read these things. And students love, not all, but some students love to push the boundaries of what they think they can get away with by claiming, "Well, I didn't realize that we had to do that." It's like, well, no, you were here. I read through it. You were in attendance. I saw you, or you had to watch this video because you joined late. And so I use it to some degree as an insulation, both for students so that they have no misconceptions about what the class is about, but also for me so that I can say, honestly, I explained all of this. It's not my fault you didn't grasp the attendance policy because you had plenty of time to ask questions. It's not my fault you didn't realize you had to turn the stuff in when it was due. And I found that has taken a lot of the mid-semester or end of semester guesswork out of the process.
Yeah, and I think similar to you, I spend it probably about 30 to 45 minutes on the syllabus itself, talking through, especially the assignments. I like to go in a decent amount of depth in the assignments. I recognize that if you're teaching a new class, you might not have everything mapped out in detail. You might have a general idea of the assignments, and that's okay. I've got a couple new preps this semester at the University of Kansas, and I have written the one paragraph description of the assignment, and I've got a decent start on the more specific directions and the rubric, but it's not going to be 100% done on the first day. So, it's okay to say I'm still finishing the details and we're going to revisit this assignment and walk through it. It's definitely okay to say that, but it's important to set those expectations for students and give, because there might be some questions that they ask that you didn't actually think about could be problems, or maybe you didn't plan ahead for. Maybe they raise their hand and they say, we don't have access to this software as a student, and you might have thought they did. Or we've never heard of XYZ, and you might be talking about it like it's something people use every day. And so that gives you some insight too as to where they're at. And people are not always going to ask questions the first day because they don't know you as a professor very well, and especially in those freshman, sophomore classes where they're not with a cohort of people who they're used to and feel comfortable around. One thing that I've been doing ever since I started teaching is at the end of the syllabus, I ask them to answer 4 questions. What do you expect to get out of this course? What assignments do you think will be most challenging and why? How can I help you be successful? And what do you plan to do to keep up with the workload in the course? And then I read through those, and actually at the next day, whatever that is, whether it's a week later or that next day of the first week of classes, I talk through, here are the things that you're concerned about. This is what I'm going to do to help you avoid that concern, and this is what you can do to help defray that worry. And for me, that also helps make the syllabus something they interact with. And then I take all the things that they said they were hoping to get out of the course, and I look at what I'm planning to teach. And sometimes I do actually make changes, especially in those survey courses where maybe we're talking about trends in an industry or the changing media landscape in sport or something to that effect. I might actually make changes to the content I plan to cover or how I plan to cover it, because I've got a bulk of students who were really hoping to talk more about NIL than I was planning to talk about it. And so that makes the syllabus something they can interact with. I know a lot of us do a syllabus quiz to make sure they read it. But like most quizzes and tests, they probably just search for that answer. They probably didn't actually read the whole thing top to bottom to get the
I've,
answer.
I've never done a syllabus quiz in 17 years of teaching.
I haven't either, but I know they're super popular.
Yeah.
But I like this way as a way to give them some back and forth. And then we actually talk through some things that, maybe there's some sort of support that I wasn't planning to give that they could benefit from. And sometimes they ask for things that I don't do. One thing I don't do, and maybe this will be a future podcast episode, but I don't provide student examples of major projects from previous semesters. So students will often ask for that, and we talk through why I don't do that at the beginning of the semester.
Yeah.
So making the syllabus not just this thing you go through, but something that they can give feedback on and tell you what they're worried or scared about in an environment that doesn't require them to raise a hand can be really beneficial use of that day and get you a little bit more than the silent crickets when you say, does anybody have questions? Okay, see you on Tuesday or Thursday.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think all that's good. I take a little different approach in that I I normally spend about 10 to 15 minutes almost promoting the class and what it's going to consist of and why the topic is interesting and why it's something that they should be excited to figure out the material in. And I think it's funny, I probably don't need to do that in sports media because generally the students are already fired up about it, but I have found that, and we've talked about this in other aspects of teaching and my particular approach on things, and obviously it works for me, it may not work for everybody else, but I just feel like you set such a good tone for a class if you are excited about the class, if you're excited about the material, and if you can talk to the students enthusiastically at the beginning of the class about why this is going to be a good experience for however many weeks you're going to be teaching the class. I think it fires them up. I'll take that all the way back to when I was a student. The boring syllabus days that you just go over things and you get let out early, I would always kind of roll my eyes and be like, well, here we go. This is going to be a long semester. I really do want students to look forward to what they're going to be doing in the class while also knowing that, hey, there's going to be a lot of work involved. You're going to have to do good work. And I think there's normally plenty of time for that on syllabus day, because that's really when I think you're wanting to get all that out in front of people and when their minds are the most open to it. I also try to learn something about the students that are in there. Now, it really depends on the size of the class, but even within the 20 or 30 minutes you might have of interacting with the students and getting initial ideas about, this topic, what do they know about it? What do they think about it? How do they feel? What have they heard? You get a sense through that process, not just of those things, but also of who are going to be the talkers in class. Who are going to be the students that are going to participate, who you're going to have to draw out. Are there little groups that are already formed of people coming in? I think all those things are important to kind of getting a feel for what the culture of the class is likely to be. And again, it doesn't always work out that way, but generally speaking, taking the time to do that on syllabus day, you learn a lot from them, just like they're learning a lot from you. And that helps me get excited, or at least be more prepared about what I'm going to be experiencing over the course of the next several weeks.
The getting to know students is, I think, really important, even if it's just a small thing about them. And I know everybody hates icebreakers. Like when you go to a new meeting or event or a networking session at an organization, they're like, we're going to start with an icebreaker. We all roll our eyes, but they have a lot of really useful qualities. And one of those is getting people to maybe relax a little bit, feel a little bit more comfortable about each other. And for me, I like to use things in my student introductions that help me remember who they are. So we, do recommend a podcast or a Netflix show or something for us. And that kind of also gives me some insight into what's cool. So then I can watch it and make references that students actually know. And two, it tells me a little bit and them a little bit about each other and tries to find some like qualities or some like interests. And that goes a long way in making students feel comfortable. And I think it's easy to skip that because it's not content, but that's the beauty of syllabus day, and I used to say we're gonna start content on day 1. I did stop doing that because I worry about the students going in and out. I don't usually teach any content because I find that if I do all of the things we're talking about in this podcast, like going through the syllabus, doing the reflection, having the get to know you activity, you don't have to call it an icebreaker if you don't want, then people won't freak out. If I do those things and then a couple more things that we'll continue to talk about, I use almost the whole class period anyway, except for a graduate, a 3-hour graduate class or a 3-hour night class is a
Right.
little bit different
Yeah.
because you're losing, that's one class is a big deal. If you miss a class, is a big deal. So that we treat those a little bit different. So I would cover content in a class that long, but not usually on other ones for this reason. And, even in a big class, you might not be able to have every student go around and introduce themselves. One, because it will take forever,
Right.
but two, because you'll lose half the students because they'll tune out after the 50th student. But you could create some sort of small group introductions. It's not as beneficial for you as the instructor because you don't get quite the same ability to connect with students because you don't get to hear each of them, but you can position yourself to wander around and continue to do enough group activities to eventually get to know them. But at the very least, that also helps connect them to each other, which I think is a really important thing in the first day of class for retaining students past the first day, especially if you've got any students who are a little bit shyer. If they walk out of the first day with your class with no connection to anybody else, they might be worried if you said you were gonna have a group project and they don't know anybody, they might drop your class because
Mhm.
that's a terrifying concept when they didn't even get to know someone else's name.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can go about doing that. The icebreaker thing, I hate icebreakers too. So what I try to do is put students in a situation where if I can draw something out of them that's not them, but is something that they're they know about that is interesting to them, sometimes that's an easier way of going about it. Because I think the worst type of icebreakers in those sorts of situations are like personal details. but that's always where icebreakers tend to go, especially in smaller classes. And it's like there's got to be better ways to go about doing this. You brought up a great point on the grad classes or the once a week classes. I mean, you can't throw a class session away at that point. But that's where I do a lot of work with the syllabus before the class launches. I do it online. Sometimes I'll even record syllabus day and I'll be like, your assignment for the first day coming in is to have watched that. And, normally I'll throw something in that they have to say or do. And yeah, maybe not everybody does it, but at least some of them will at least have watched it. And that's a nice starting point. And they're still at that point obligated to know all that material. But yeah, you do have to be kind of a little more, you know, you have to keep in mind like you've got X amount of things you need to teach throughout the course of the semester, and maybe you've got it so that you don't have to use all the first day. And if so, that's great. But a lot of times that's not the case.
And sometimes, like you mentioned, like the icebreaker activity, maybe you find a short video about something that is just plain interesting or thought provoking. You watch it and then you break them up into small groups and let them talk about it. Something that isn't core to the content of the class, but maybe it helps with the importance of the why of the class and
Mhm.
some of the selling of the class. So you're kind of doubling up and reinforcing that concept too.
Yeah, that's the more you can make the opening day kind of feel like a miniature version of what they're going to be dealing with moving forward, I think the better. And that might be the best way to think about it. It shouldn't be an actual class session, but it shouldn't be divorced from the content. And I think it's like the as students get their heads wrapped around why they're in the class in the first place. That's another thing I think is really important. It's like place the course within a field of meaning, within the degree trajectories of the people that are in there, within the larger spectrum of the industry that you might have connected to whatever you're teaching or whatever academic pursuits. The a lot of what we've talked about on this podcast has come down to this idea of the student as the consumer. And I will maintain, I think students are actually very open to learning. They're very open to going to classes. They're very open to being part of a larger educational environment. What they're not open to is engaging in those things without having a clearer sense of why they're doing what you're asking them to do. And so the more of that you can put in at the beginning, I think the more they're going to respect you as an instructor because clearly you've thought about it on behalf of them. And that does resonate with maybe not every student, but certainly with quite a few of them.
And I also think it's important to always remember that it's hard to reach everyone. I won't say you will never reach everyone because there are definitely faculty that do, and there are definitely classes where you feel like you do. But you do have to remember that you're trying to make the greatest impact on the greatest number of students and do the best you can to help everybody through the process. And so don't always look at something. I think that there's a tendency to be like, well, some students won't do that. Okay, well, some students won't, but most will. And your goal is to still do the thing. And if you can find additional ways to encourage the some who won't to actually do it, great. And doing the syllabus video beforehand is a good example of that. If you can get most of them to do it, great, and then try to find some sort of incentive to get those additional students to hop on board. The last thing I wanted to mention, because I feel like, I don't know, I thought syllabus day would be a really short episode, but I actually think there's a lot of other things that we could maybe talk through. Maybe two more things we have time for.
Okay.
Galen, you mentioned that you spend some time setting up the why, which I think is really important. And I know faculty hate using the word sell your class because nobody desires to be a salespeople except that small group that really loves sales. But that is in essence what we are on that first day is tell them why this matters and get them jazzed about it so they want to come back.
Yep.
The other thing that I think is really important for me is I talk a little bit about my teaching philosophy and my teaching style so that they know what to expect from me as a teacher. And for me, that has been really beneficial because I'm a teacher who doesn't do a ton of lecturing and we have to be really active in class. If you don't come to class prepared, you're not going to be able to do the activities that we're going to do. And I like to set that expectation up front. And I tell them, how I view learning and why struggle is important in learning so that they understand why I'm not giving them a checklist for assignments where they can check off the box and they know they get an A if they just check every box. And that to me, I think all professors really need to think about. If you haven't articulated who you are as a teacher and what your philosophy and approach to teaching is, that's something that you should spend some time doing, and I'm happy to help give some reading for how to do that. And you should share with your students
Mhm.
how you approach teaching and what about teaching is important to you, because they, while they might not understand teaching as a profession, they at least then have a better understanding of you. And it's, for me, so much of teaching is all about building rapport and trust with each other, between the professor and the students, and between the students and each other.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a variety of different ways to go about that. And as we've talked about on numerous prior episodes, you got to be yourself. You have to be comfortable with your own approach, but you need to explain what you're doing to the students ahead of time. And again, I think, helping them understand what approaches you're going to take and what environment you want the classroom to have, and all of that really all fits under the same umbrella to me. And it is a way of getting your students to consider that there are going to be expectations, there's going to be methodologies, there's a bunch of different things to think about within the process of the class. And they, some of them will be thrown off by that because they're probably not getting that in a lot of the other classes that they're doing. But if you consistently do that, that's, I think, oftentimes how you get students not just wanting to stay in the class that you're teaching, but sign up for additional classes that you offer later that may not be of interest or concern to you, but for some it is. And look, again, I think a lot of it really comes back to, what is this that I'm taking, and what am I going to be getting from it, and how is that going to be delivered? And then you throw the overarching, why are we doing this, on top of that. Like, all of that matters. And if you think about it along those lines, and you don't think about it, I think one of the big problems sometimes we have is like, I say all of that, or you and I say all of that, and it's like, well, why are we being asked to do all this additional stuff? So, certainly people 20, 30 years ago weren't being asked to do that, and that's probably true. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be asked to do it now, because as we talk about a lot, the environment has changed. And I look at it less as justifying what I'm doing or justifying how I'm approaching the class, and more just telling them, here's what we're going to do. And I think explaining that ahead of time really can create better rapport and better understanding of what is being done, because there's less surprises along the way. And I think it also allows you to tell students who aren't living up to expectations, look, we talked about this at the beginning, this is it in action. Was Why is there a disconnect here?
And I think that's why, for me, syllabus day is the most important day of the semester, because this is your opportunity to set the tone, to tell students what to expect, to give them an opportunity to ask additional questions
Yep.
before they dive in for a full semester. And later on, you have something to circle back to. We talked about this. This is what staying in the class meant, and this is how we're moving forward. And that can defray some of those issues on the back end. And plus, I want students to want to come to class. And I think excitement, as Galen has said it a couple times, being excited about the content you're teaching is really half the battle for getting students to want to be there.
Yeah.
And while students don't always love the way that I grade or how I set up assignment expectations, consistently students will say she's really excited about what she teaches and she really loves it. And that goes a long, long way in getting them to at least try to do some of the things they maybe didn't want to do in the first place. And for me as a teacher, like, that's, if every student only said that on a teaching evaluation for the rest of my career, I mean, I want them to learn things, and I usually that's paired with I learned something. But I want them to know that this is a thing that I care about, and I'm trying to tell them why it matters and get them excited about it too, because you have to want to be somewhere to learn anything. That's whether you're a student or a professional or, faculty member. If you don't care about the committee work you're doing or the outcome you're trying to create, you're going to hate going to that meeting. You're going to look for excuses. And occasionally I'd like to remind us to look internally at the way that we react when we don't see value in something and we're not given the why behind how what we're asked to do as faculty. It's really no different for our students when they step into our classrooms if we're not giving that to them.
Yeah, I agree. And not that faculty would ever actively avoid committee meetings or other service obligations. I could never envision that happening. So
Uh, Spoken like a true administrator.
I know, but I think ultimately, it's a great point, and it's, College students and faculty don't think that much differently, even though we like to pretend that we do. We're all human beings, and we all live in a particular culture that has a lot of things that we get asked to do without really understanding why they would matter. And at least in the case of classes, faculty and program leaders and accreditation bodies have decided like this cluster of classes is important and here's why. So being able to state that to students who may not know that, I had a student the other day I was dealing with who was like, can I get a waiver on this requirement? Because they just didn't think they should have to do it. And I was like, well, no, we can't do that because like it's there for a reason, and there are good reasons for it. And I explained it, and that sometimes that's all that's needed. You can
Yep.
do that on syllabus day pretty easily.
Yep. I agree. Great. Well, I hope that you all are having fun preparing for syllabus day and getting excited to meet a new group of students. As always, you're welcome to reach out if you have any questions or want ideas or examples, and contact me at Becky at theengagedprofessor.com. You can also contact me at Becky Aiken at ku.edu. And I look forward to having you join us for our next episode.